Hello everyone, welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. I wanted to have a good discussion, hopefully, about Tarzan and my thoughts about it. So Tarzan is a book that I read in February for my author challenge, my try an author each month kind of thing I'm doing for myself. And I picked out Edgar Burroughs, and I was wanting to try Tarzan since I've owned this beautiful edition. These editions are like kryptonite to me, but I picked it up and I started reading, and right away I noticed some, shall we say, racial commentary. Okay. First thing I wanted to note was that this book was published, I believe, in 1914, and I don't know anything else about the author. I really should have looked it up, but I believe that the author is British, and that at least I know he's a white man. Okay. But this book was published early 1900s, and that this is my struggle coming into it. So when I picked it up, my only knowledge of Tarzan was the movie growing up, and the Disney film was it. I know that Disney is not very factually sound when it comes to its interpretations and the way it treats its source material, so I wasn't expecting it to be true to fact. And I have to say that in some ways it was very refreshingly true to fact in some ways, but there were some racial connotations that I really hesitated with. And I want to say before we get too far in that I did wear my classics glasses, not like a literal pair of glasses, but when I always read a classic, I always put on a classics mentality where I'm in a modern world, but I know that the author wrote this book, or any book that's a classic written in the past tense, and I know the author wrote it in their decade, in their time, and the author therefore has those prejudices set upon them, whether that be from their society, from their parentage, from their culture. I know that that's a place. And I also know that those are not okay, but I also want to look at the text and know that those are already going to be influencing the text itself, and I cannot disregard that. So when I was reading Tarzan, that was a problem. So the very beginning of it talks about Tarzan's parents as they are on a ship, and Tarzan's father, the wonderful, wonderful Lord, as he's basically described, saves a man who is African. He saves his life on the ship. And the text calls them Negroes, and I really didn't like reading that term often, and this book talked a lot about them like that, and I just really, I mean, I know it was written in a past tense and past time, and I know, I get it, but it was like, Anyways, so these African men are on the boat, and they basically mutiny the captain. They take over the entire ship, and because Tarzan's father was so life-saving, they spare his life and the life of his wife, but then they bring them to shore as soon as possible and get them settled, or basically say, here's all your stuff, and leave. And so they set up life there. Shortly after that, Tarzan is born, and his parents die about 6 months after the fact. I should have said this with spoilers, in case you didn't know. Sorry. I'm going to be going into my spoilers thoughts here, and I really want to have this to be an open discussion, because I tried doing it at a wrap-up or summary, some thoughts like that, and it just didn't work. So this book has this interesting premise for me where we are meeting a child, Tarzan, who has been raised with no, you should think, no biases, because he's being raised by apes in the jungle, and therefore he should have no bias, right? He should have no bias against skin color or race or anything of that context. However, you also have an author who's writing this book, putting his own biases into the book. That's always something that's going to happen. We all have biases, we all have prejudices, and we all have to work against those or to identify them and try to correct them. And the author's biases are always going to be in the book. So we have to recognize that. Then you also have Tarzan, who, when he learns to read, he learns that M is for man and N is for Negro. And it was not a comfortable reading experience. And I felt really awkward with that kind of parallel. I felt like the adventure part of this book and the part of him with the apes and the different aspects of that were really wonderful. But then everything else was just not. I myself have no African heritage, and I am not African in any way. And I don't want to speak for someone else's voice in this video. So I would love to find more people who have read Tarzan who are of African heritage or who are African, to find out their voices, because this book is set on off the coast of Africa, and it talks a lot about the village that Tarzan finds, and it has terms like savage, and it has things like that, and it was just like, why is a boy who has no biases being biased? And I know it's a classic. I get it. I do understand, because if you've watched my channel, you know I read lots of classics, and I have a very good mind when it comes to reading classics and keeping that bias under my mind when I'm reading an old book and understanding that there are those things in place. But this one was different because of the premise we're working under. And I felt like that just was an interesting way to go. I also feel like Tarzan as a character was an interesting one because of how we were going off of he knows no people, so he shouldn't have this perception of white is better than black, or whatever they were trying to inform him in his reading. He had such strange statements to make when when he saw Jane. Not that he met her, but when he saw Jane, because they all came onto the land, and then with Jane was a black woman, and her name was Esmeralda. But when he saw Jane, he recognized her as one of his own. That's what it said. And Esmeralda was not one of his own. And I found that to be very confusing, because they're human. They're all his own. Just because Esmeralda's not white does not mean she's not one of his own. And I felt very uncomfortable reading that. And I didn't like the fact that just because Jane was white and delicate and fair, that meant that Tarzan was instantly in love with her or was instantly attracted to her because she was like him. And I was very offended by it. The reason why also is because Tarzan spends so much time in the sun, he's considered brown and dark, and it's like he's a god. And I'm like, but you're also talking about skin tone, you're talking about colorism, and it's just an interesting and awful parallel of what these people are talking about. Then you also get to later where Tarzan is like talking about killing these people, and I had to save the spot because it was just, it really rubbed me the wrong way. And this is pretty far into the book. It was after Tarzan has saved them all, and he saved the French man named Donat. I don't speak French, I'm sorry. But after he saved Donat, and they are going to try to get to North America, they're trying to get to the US so Tarzan can meet Jane and get back to her. It was really awkward. Again, really uncomfortable, really unsettling to read all of this. And I just was like, can I get this book over with, essentially, at this point? But basically, so he's just saved them. They're trying to leave and trying to charter a boat. So this is where they're going. So Tarzan fitted a bow with a poisoned arrow, but Darnot placed a hand upon his arm. "What would you do, Tarzan?" he asked. "They would try to kill us if they see us," replied Tarzan. "I prefer to be the killer." "Maybe they are friends," suggested Darnot. "They are black," was Tarzan's only reply. And then Darnot does not make it any better. he says, "You must not, Tarzan cried, dare not. White men do not kill wantonly." Yeah. Not great. And it's just a book about bias, and I don't know if I'd recommend this classic to anyone, to be honest. I don't want to continue on, and I don't want to read this ever again. And based on the discussion in here about race and the way people were treated, I don't know if I'd ever recommend this to someone to read as a classic. And that sounds, I feel like really horrible saying that, because I've always been an advocate of reading classics and critiquing them and, you know, looking at them with a critical lens. But this one, I just don't know if it's worth it. I just don't know if this one's worth it. It's just so, I don't know how to describe it. It also has a really interesting talk about colonization and the fact that it talks about it happening. You know, the French are just there. They take over and suddenly, you know, there are white people there and the black village is gone. The African village is gone. And it talks about how the women cry for the men and the men are just killed. And it has colonization in it. And it's just okay. It's just okay. And this book was written in 1914 or something. It's just like, how do people think it's okay? I don't understand. And this book has been so unsettling to me since I finished it. I don't know. I think this book is well written. And I think it's an interesting story if you take out everything that I just talked about. But I don't like what I just talked about. I don't like Tarzan when he's interacting with humans. I don't like how it talks about skin color and how it talks about we're different kinds of people. And I don't like how it talks about, I don't know, how some people are savages and some people aren't, and how the white men can be in charge of a boat, but the black men can't. I don't like those things. And I know no one does, but it's just horrific to me in some ways that this book was still being written in 1912, 1914, and it's still okay. Like, I don't understand that. It's just shocking to me that this book was written, maybe not shocking, to be honest, not shocking, but it's surprising that this book was written so recently and was still okay. This is a book I would expect to see written in 1800s and with this kind of discussion. That's kind of what I would expect from this storyline, and it was written 1900s. Even though that's over 100 years ago now, that's still after the fact, and I can't believe that things like that were, I don't know, just brushed under the rug if people have read Tarzan. And I don't recommend reading it, as sad as that is, because of the things it talks about when you're not with the animals. Yeah. I don't know how to feel anymore about this kind of idea. And I didn't know what to do with my thoughts on this book, so I made a video about it. But yeah, like I said, I'm not of African descent, and I am not African myself, so I would love to hear an Own Voices review of this, and I suggest looking out for them. I have tried and I didn't find any yet, but if you know of any, please let me know, and then I will gladly refer you to them in my description box. If I find any, I will update my description box, but yeah, I definitely did not expect to find that in this, but I probably should have. And I did not expect to see so much commentary on what a bias would be like. And I think it's interesting. I also want to mention that I work with children, so I think that also impacts my reading experience of reading about a child growing up without biases, or shouldn't be without biases. So that does impact my reading experience. But yeah, so I don't know. Those are my thoughts on Tarzan of the Apes, at least in regards to the negative. And I don't know what else to say. It doesn't get a good rating from me in terms of enjoyment level and in terms of other things, because it's just not something I would pass on to others, and not something I would highly recommend because of this discussion, unless you're wanting to walk into it with those discussions in there, because I do take up a lot of the book, and I didn't enjoy that, or I didn't enjoy discovering it as I was reading. So those are my thoughts on Tarzan of the Apes. I don't normally make dedicated individual reviews like this, but I felt that I needed to for this one. So please let me know if you've read Tarzan, or what your thoughts are on books like these, on classics like these, if we should be reading them, if we should be recommending them. What are your thoughts on tough classics like this? I would love to hear your thoughts about them down below in the comments. And yeah, please like this video if you have something you'd like to discuss. And I don't know, subscribe if you're new here. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.